All right, Block 9, Costs and Consequences of the Civil War. Let's start with the most obvious, casualties. The number of casualties in the Civil War defies modern understanding. We simply cannot wrap our heads around the number of people killed in this war. Total dead, let's start at the top. The total dead in the war was about 620,000. And I want you to imagine Yankee Stadium, pictured there on the right, full 12 or 13 times. And that's how many men died in the Civil War. Some estimates of the dead are as high as 700,000. And that's in a country that was much smaller than today's. That if you translate that to the American modern population figures, if we fought a war today as lethal as the Civil War, that would be 6,100,000 dead. In the entire conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan that has been going on for over 10 years now, the United States has suffered less than 5,000 killed. If the Civil War was translated to modern times, that's 6,100,000. 110,000 Northern troops died in battle, 250,000 Northern troops died of disease. 275,000 Union soldiers were wounded. Many of them lost arms or legs, lived in pain for the rest of their lives. Many became drug addicts. Painkillers had been introduced, and these men who had arms and legs sawed off by army surgeons in the middle of battles often, came home and were not productive members of society because of the pain and the addiction to drugs that developed to try to fight that pain. If you were a Union soldier, you had about an 11% chance of being hit by a bullet or a shell. Of those total, 4% were killed. 4% doesn't seem a lot, but that's 1 in 25. 7% were wounded. So if you joined up, you had a better than 1 in 10 chance of getting hit by a bullet. And that doesn't even go to the number of people who were killed by disease. The Southerners lost fewer men in battle, 94,000. 164,000 died of disease. Almost 200,000 were wounded. If you were a Confederate soldier, you had about a 15% chance of being hit, a 5% chance of being killed, and about a 10% chance of being wounded. And when we look at these numbers, like I said when I read Sullivan Ballew's letter to you, please keep in mind that each number is a person. The monetary costs. The war cost the United States about $2.3 billion when that was a lot of money. Taxes were raised to a higher level than had ever been the case in American history. Letter C. Paper money, greenbacks, were issued by the United States government for the first time. And that kind of started the modern banking system of the United States, which we'll talk about later in the block. Hundreds of millions of dollars in loans were issued by the United States government, and those people got their money back in time. But the Confederacy also put out hundreds of millions of dollars in loans, and those investors, of course, lost everything. Number 3, material destruction. Much of the South is destroyed, especially Virginia, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Every major city in those states was destroyed or damaged by the war. Sherman's march to the sea had decimated about 18,000 square miles of the Georgia countryside. The old plantations in many cases are falling into ruins. The slaves have left, especially in those parts of the South near where the Union armies were operating. Many of the elites of the South, that grand, aristocratic, gentlemanly corps that had formed the Old South, many of them were the officers in the Confederate Army, and many of them had been killed or wounded. The production of cotton was at a standstill. Meanwhile, in the North, the war had been great for the economy, and business was booming. One huge consequence was now you don't have 4 million slaves, you have 4 million what are known at the time as freedmen. F-R-E-E-D-M-E-N, one word, the freedmen. What were you going to do with 4 million recently freed slaves? For the most part, they were illiterate. They had no education. They had very limited economic skills. All they have ever known in their lives was picking cotton. What do you do with them? A sense of nationalism, number 5, had come over the North. people largely began defining themselves as Americans, as opposed to the citizens of either a specific state or of the North. That the war had been fought by most soldiers to save the Union, and it was to that Union that people started giving their emotional allegiance. The United States of America, for the first time, begins to use the verb is instead of the verb are. That before this, if you wanted to talk about the United States, you would say, the United States are a vast country with a powerful navy. United States are, implying that the states was more important than the United. States are powerful. After the Civil War, the verb changes to is. The United States is a powerful country, implying a unity and a oneness that was not there before. And most importantly, for the future of the nation, letter A, what on earth do you do with the defeated but still proud South? That would be the great issue of Reconstruction, and that would be dealt with by President Andrew Johnson and his enemies, the Republicans in Congress.